All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, from a holiday weekend. Hope you all had a good, warm weekend. I don't mind the heat, but it was a little bit too warm for the end of August and early September. But I'm glad you can find us today in our coffee break for September. And so today we are welcoming two of our extension colleagues from the Educational Technologies Support Group. So Graeme and Megan Wecker, thanks for joining us today. So our topic today, we wanted to do a little bit of focus on SharePoint. And so if you're not familiar, SharePoint is kind of the platform that we use for our intranet. And, we've been, each institute has its own sites. So we have an NRI intranet site, and we've been working somewhat behind the scenes trying to figure out and configuring it to be useful to you in a place that is a place to go for information. So we when we record these coffee break sessions, we put those on the intranet and a number of other kind of resources that we have. And so wanted to invite Megan and Kevin in to talk a little bit about SharePoint as a tool, perhaps give us some examples on how it is being used and maybe used well within extension, take a little bit of look at our intranet site and what you can find there, and also just get some feedback from you all as well, because we want to make it useful to you. And so if there are things that you see of either information or things that you want to be able to find on the intranet site, we can help kind of customize it and make some of that happen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and Megan, and the show is yours.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Chad. That was a great intro, honestly. I think we're just going to hop right in, if that's all right. So Kevin and I divided our presentation today into a couple of different parts. So I'm going to let Kevin start by telling you a little bit. We're going to go way back. I think lots of people, half of the people are like, yeah, what are you talking about? I use the intranet every day. I know what's going on. And the other half are like, yeah, I kept hearing that word. And then SharePoint kind of came in, and I know it exists. And there's this link I use in my email from 2011. So people tend to fall into one of those two categories. So we're going to take it back just a little bit and talk about a couple of things as far as what is the intranet and why does it matter. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. So the goals, as Chad's outlined, Megan's reiterated, basically what is it, how to access it, what can you find there, and how to make it work for you. So the big question is SharePoint, intranet, what is this terminology? Why do we have both words? Basically, intranet is a generic term of internal websites. Our platform that we use is SharePoint. And for the most part, for most of your use, it's simply just that. It's going to be a website. So just learning how to find things, but in an internal space that you can't Google. So that's one of the big differentiators of it from, say, all of our WordPress websites, right? SharePoint, as opposed to, say, using WordPress, we could password protect WordPress, but doing it in SharePoint, it's better integrated with our other Microsoft tools, and it also has really great internal search, which we'll look at. And then it is where Teams stores files. So if any of you have been using Microsoft Teams and wondering, what are these files? Where are they? We'll talk about that. So I do want to talk about the Microsoft 365 just overall ecosystem. Many of you have obviously used Word and Excel and stuff, PowerPoint. Some of you have been maybe using OneDrive for personal storage. It's very similar to your Google Shared Drive. Some of you may end up using it a little more with the new quotas that have been applied to Google Drive. But the 365 groups and teams work really tightly together as a set of SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Planner, which we'll take a quick look at, and then email and calendar. So those are all really tightly baked together into a strong set of tools that we'll take a look at as we look at your SharePoint site. So the first big question is just, how do I access it? Chad did, of course, link in chat the direct link to your stuff, but in the just general sense of how do I get to any of the extension intranet, you can simply go to the mywisc.edu tile, and we have a tile on there for extension, which automatically shows up when you have an extension appointment, and then you simply click intranet. There are other ways to get there, but that's really honestly the easiest. So I'm going to stop the presentation now. That's the extent of our slides for this. So so here I am at the mywisc.edu login screen. I'm going to scroll down. It happens to be my last tile. So I just click intranet. And you can see, because I'm already logged into mywisc.edu, I don't have to deal with that NetID login screen. It just takes me right in because I've already logged into mywisc.edu. And so we've got the division of extension intranet here. So from here, there are a lot of, this is the overall portal. It's a very minimalist site, but it does have a lot of links to everything that you might be interested in. Of course, the Institute resource sites are all up here. Then there's the Dean's Communications. So this is where all of Carl's exchanges and updates are posted. So if you ever are looking for the recording of those, that's where to find them. The program communications site, many of you have probably seen this. This is still on WordPress. This is where a lot of those just resources and things for program communications have been shared for years. And then operation and policy groups, we've got different sites. So educational technology support, for instance, has a site here. So within here, you can obviously, we update it regularly. So right now the conference registration is going on. If you haven't signed up, consider signing up for the conference there. And then there's just links to a lot of those resources that are just like, where do I find these? There are links right on here. So, the staff directory, human resources, strategic planning effort of what's happening with that. And then a lot of those administrative tools and processes, like for managers, the general signatory agreements, but your professional development funds. And this will tie back to something in your NRI site. Injury and incident reporting, just those things that you have to do as part of your administrative duties. And then there is a link to the planning and reporting portal. So if you're ever like, where is that? How do I find that? Right here. And then we do have links to all the Institute sites. We've got the various governance groups, links to their resources, the employee resource groups. And we even have a thing that just automatically finds, if you're just using SharePoint, this will update to the most recent ones that you've been using. And then a few of our other UW-Madison resources. So really important travel and reimbursement, and the policy library, records retention rules. We all love those. It's great, right? So that's the overall intranet and things that you may be able to find there. Diving into your natural resources site, this is something that I've seen that Tricia, Michelle, Martha, you've been really building out and expanding. I want to show you that there's two views of this site. Right now, I'm logged in just as me, right? I'm not in NRI. This is just me. So you'll see things like I see this group no longer exists. It may have been deleted. That's a bad error message. But basically, this is where your internal calendar would show up. Because I'm not in NRI, I don't see that. Documents, site documents. I only see your site documents. We'll talk about that. So what I'm going to do is flip over to my admin login. Good question, Eric. Following a group. So here I am logged in. You can see here I'm not following. Any of these sites that you follow, if you're a member, you're sort of already following it to some extent. If you click following, so let's switch over to educational technology support. So this is a site that you're not a member of. If you were to click following, now all of our news will automatically be sent to you on a periodic basis. So if you've ever gotten those emails of news you may have missed from SharePoint, this is part of what generates that following. It just says, this is a site that I'm interested in. And when you go click here on the SharePoint start page, this is not the extension home. This is SharePoint, just for everything, everybody on campus. There's over 14,000 team sites on campus. You'll see that this news from sites, this is populated based on the sites that you choose to follow. So it's a automated roll up of sites that you either have access to or that you are following. So you can see it covers a whole lot of different groups. So good question. So back into your NRI SharePoint site. So here, this is just a home for NRI staff to be able to find your regular common resources. Some things that are common to all of them is that we have these, just general mission and about us, but we have quick links that are relevant to each institute. They're going to be different. There is a calendar. This is an actual integrated Outlook calendar. So when you get these, say, coffee break invites, if you lost that email and it was shared here, you can always come back here to find that, and you would be able to, this is a bug, you would be able to add the event to your calendar if for some reason it was missing. So let's just kind of go through some of the quick links, because I think these are things that are kind of your day-to-day useful things. You've got the Lookout newsletter, which goes in and has all the archives of those newsletters. So if you're ever looking for those, it links directly there. Submit your news or events here. So you'll see that you have Institute news here. That's how you would add, if you've got something to share, you can submit it there. One of the things I do want to point out here, we live in a blended ecosystem. That's not the right account. Well, I'm not going to worry about that. That's I'm going to log in here. So this is a part of our just day-to-day existence. We have Google, we have SharePoint. We could, of course, build this form in Microsoft and embed it into the SharePoint site. But one of the cool things is that if you're familiar with Google, you can build your forms in Google and simply link to them, and it just works. So just like you would any other website. So that's a key thing to think about, is just because it's SharePoint doesn't mean that you have to do everything, that you have to learn a whole new tool set. You can just use it like a website. Same with the staff list here. This links out to your public NRI site, and this is all pulling in from your staff directory, right? So if you're looking for anybody, this is just an easy way to get to your staff listing. Your social media, this is brilliant. We've shared this within ETS as a really great example of how programs should be doing their social media promotion. Just a good list of all of your social media. So if you're not aware of a different program's social media feed, you can find it here. And professional development opportunities. So on the homepage, I talked about, there's that link to apply for professional development funds. Many of you probably already know this, but I really love this, where you as a group have shared what you have for sort of common professional development opportunities that are relevant to NRI that people might want to apply to. And then this just links back to the SharePoint administrative tools. So here's now where you can apply for that professional development funding. So once again, this is this is a Google sheet. Here, it's from your SharePoint site and it links back to SharePoint. So we're blending these environments based on the comfort of the people building the tools. Totally doable.
Hey, Kevin, I want to go back for just a second. I low-key putting Trisha on the spot, but I was wondering, Trisha, if you could tell us a little bit about when people go to submit news or events here, what makes for good submissions and like what do you want to see? Because I feel like that's a really obvious, easy way. Like if you're going to send it to a bunch of your friends on Messenger anyway, you might as well submit it here. So what
Yeah.
makes for a good submission?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And actually, that's something we want to put up here is just a little more description of what those sections are so people know what goes in here. We started putting, again, we've just started building this structure a little bit more. So we started putting things that would be, rather than, so what we're thinking of is when we have some upcoming internal events, that would already be in a calendar. So news would be things like upcoming external conferences. Now that does get into some of the professional development. So there's a little bit of an overlap from conferences that people may want to present at versus those that they may want to go to. So I think that's one thing we're looking at is how to differentiate news from some of the professional development. But we are putting conferences up there. Awards or newsworthy items. So when some of our programs are being shared in the news, we'd want to put some of those up there as well. So again, some things that people would want to see that would be relevant to our programs that they may want to participate in the future. So we'll do thanks again, Megan. We're trying to figure out how to differentiate these areas, but really we want to make sure that people have a chance to sort of see things that are relevant and also have access to it a little bit more quickly than we had before. So I'll mention another one is when we have some sort of bigger final products or reports that are going out there, I think that would be another one. We'll store that in some of the materials as well, but when we have sort of broader reporting on that, I think that would be another place to put that in the news.
So if I go to that Google form and I'm like, oh, there's a really cool conference coming up, I want to tell all of my colleagues about it. So you go, you click event, you attach a link. Is there anything else as a person submitting an item for consideration that I need to do or be worried about? Or not worried about, but like
No, good question. No, I think as long as we have all that relevant information, the links will help us how we share that. And so I think as you are putting this in, there may be, I guess, one idea, Megan, for that would be why you think it's newsworthy, like where the relevance comes in. I think that would help us also, so we can help, again, advertise and get the word out about that article. So
cool. From a user end, I like it. I don't even have to write an article. I just have to submit an idea. That's really cool.
Yeah. And so we had so Michelle, who is a student working with us, she's got an internship. So we're actually switching over some of our administrative support. So we have another student, Grace, and Grace is going to be helping support this. So what we've been doing is we figure it's better to have a point person for this so that everybody's not submitting and putting things on. So we have a little bit more a point person. It makes it a little easier so people aren't having to sort of, like you said, do it themselves, and we can just take the information, craft it, and get it up there for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Trisha. And thanks for doing great on the spot.
And
it's in process. So go ahead,
follow
Chad.
up, Megan. So like when we put things into here, is it just going to show up on this page? So like this is where people would have to go to find it, or will it come out in an email, kind of the digest form of things, so that it's not relying on people having to come to this site to actually see that information?
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Kevin answer, but the answer is yes and yes. So, but he can give you a little bit more detail about what those are gonna look like. And I don't know if he wants to go into this, but you folks did this really cleverly, and you have like different types of news feeds. So it's with tags and some other cool stuff. So like honestly, I'm excited about how you're doing news. So Kevin, you want to talk about how they're doing that and where they can find this information?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to comment on is something that Tricia said, is that you're not required to submit and know how to use SharePoint, right? One of the things that we want to reiterate is that for you, SharePoint is just a website to go find information and resources. Now, you may get to, a point where you're like, I want to use this for my program too, and we can help facilitate that. But posting news is not an expectation. Sharing news to be posted, and it's a small power users group that is maintaining the site. So yes, the Institute news is one category of news, so that's what shows up here. You do have DEI events as another type of news, so that is a feed that shows up here. And is it under internal resources? Yeah, so you've got some guidance and policy, these coffee breaks. So these are all monthly NRI Zooms. So these are all in the same news bucket for NRI, but as Megan said, we've helped set up tagging so that they can be presented as separate feeds of, like, this is the NRI meetings, this is the Zooms, et cetera. I'm going to switch over to.
So then, Kevin, how do I know I'm getting all of the news, or do I need to like actually check out the SharePoint site from time to time? Like, what happens with those email digests?
Yeah, so there is a way that the people running the site, I'm not sure who's managing your newsletter. Is it Michelle, Martha?
Sorry, Kevin, you mean this SharePoint site or
the news,
or like the digest?
The news digest,
like a digest. Yeah. So we haven't started sending out a digest yet. That's because we wanted to make sure we were starting to populate this a little bit more and have some fresh content. So we didn't initiate the weekly or digest yet. But that's something we want to do once we start getting again more content up here, so that so with that, my assumption then, and this is for you all, is that we can choose which news feed we're pulling from for the digest. Like, we have to curate it a bit. Is that correct?
A little bit. So for the digests, it's just one big block of news. They're all integrated here. So I'm showing a little bit of the back end, how the sausage is made, but this is maybe helpful for any of you who are, I know that, for instance, the Great Lakes or Lake Superior Reserve is has their own SharePoint site. Upham Woods has their own SharePoint site. And so if you're a program that doesn't yet have a SharePoint site, this is kind of a preview of ideas of how you might want to use it for your own program work. But certainly the NRI site is a single place for everything as well. So anyway, once news is added to the site, the people managing it can send out a news digest where you simply go in and you're able to pick different news posts and then create a email.
I will say too, this is how ETS has been doing our newsletters. And what's really nice, exactly what Kevin's showing, you can pick what you want to send and then not what you don't want to send.
Yeah.
So if there's things with higher priority, you can absolutely do that. One of the other that most of you are probably familiar with this this digest concept from SharePoint. Just kind of automatically sends you one that says news you might have missed. So any SharePoint site that you are already a part of, it's going to pull any news item or that you're following, to Eric's point earlier, or to question earlier, and it's going to pull those things as things that it thinks you are interested in, and it's going to automatically send you that like conglomerate sort of news across all of the intranet, or the extension intranet thing. So yep, so as Kevin's showing, you just select the ones you want. You can reorder them. You put in whatever message you want and to whom you plan to send it, and that's it. And you hit send news digest. It is the easiest way to do a newsletter that I have come across so far.
Yep. So I do want to point out, I'm just putting in my email here for demonstration purposes. This can certainly go to one of our Google group lists, for your institute or whatever it is. So if you have certain targeted news that you want to do for different groups, you can certainly target them as well. So you can see I was able to select key articles. I was able to rearrange them. And now when I say send news digest, it is sending that email. And we're going to do the risky thing of a live demo.
In Kevin's email.
So you can see here's how it comes in to your email. So you won't need to be, most of you won't be the ones sending out this digest. It's only the people managing the site. But I'm showing this because, like I said, your program might be interested in doing something, within your context of sharing that news.
And just to create awareness, a human cultivated what news they wanted to send you and sent it to you. So it was not done by AI or anything like that.
Correct. So this is a manually configured newsletter, and then each one of these links back to the site. Now, if I do a search for news you might have missed, this gets to that question of when you're following sites, this is something that is auto-generated. And so everybody gets a different news feed for this news you might have missed. And so you can see this is EdTech, Ag Institute, natural resources. So even though you haven't been in NRI sending out the email intentionally, SharePoint is still doing it for you for all of your members. So if you've been getting some NRI news posts, this is why. So that's all part of the blended system. It's like you can intentionally go to the website and look at news. The site owners can send out a curated newsletter, and then SharePoint will automatically send you periodic updates as news is posted. Great questions. So the other key thing I want to talk about in NRI for your NRI site is documents. And then we'll take a look at how some other groups are using their SharePoint and just kind of give you some ideas. So I showed you before that in my regular login, I only had access to see site documents. So we're doing something that's a little out of the box, breaking the out of the box defaults. So this is what's called a team site. And you can see it's a private group. But I've massaged the permissions so that it's actually visible to everyone in extension. But there is still the internal components for the team that are private. I mentioned that already with the calendar. So only people in the NRI members list are able to see the calendar. If you go to the NRI site and you cannot see the calendar on here, contact Trisha or Chad. Who should be the point of contact for updating permissions on the site?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Just contact me. Just send a message if you're not part of the group or you're not a member, because it should be auto-populated through HR when we have new staff come. They're added both to our NRI listserv and then as part of this as well. So again, if we need to make sure, and there's obviously sometimes a lag time, we'll make sure that you have access to all of this.
So just as a small correction to that. The Google groups that manage your email list are auto-populated, but
Yes. The
the
SharePoint isn't.
SharePoint site membership is not. You
Oh, okay.
automatically
Sorry,
get
Kevin.
access-
Yeah.
You automatically get read access to all the publicly visible content. That is automated, but the specific NRI membership of the site has to be manually maintained.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll make sure to double check that.
That's why I wanted to say, if you don't see this,
Yeah.
calendar, contact Tricia.
Okay.
So
Thanks,
similarly, site documents versus team documents. So site documents are something that you want to, as an institute, share with everybody. It could be your plans of work. It could be program materials that you're doing in a cross-collaboration sense, right? Climate change is a huge cross-programmatic effort, cross-institute effort. And these are just your current buckets. Your program materials and reports are broken out into your programs. And then, so like the reserve here has their highlights, but I mentioned the reserve also has their own SharePoint site. And I've been really working with those of you at the reserve on reorganizing that content, because over time you've had a lot of sprawl. So if any of the rest of you have questions about organizing content in SharePoint, please contact me and I'm happy to work with you to put together a plan for how to consolidate your stuff. So site documents, these are the things that, like I said, are available that you would want to share with all of Extension. And then team documents are the internal things just to NRI. And we call them team documents because if we switch over to Microsoft Teams, you can see natural resources, and then there's currently just the two channels, general and land and water. And so if I go into general and I click files, you can see NRI overview 2020 PDF. And I go back to the SharePoint site, I go into general, NRI overview 2020 PDF. So that's a really important concept I want to make sure everybody's very comfortable with, is that the team documents in your SharePoint site are the same documents as you would access through Microsoft Teams. The site documents are only on the SharePoint site. They are not accessible through Microsoft Teams. So just pretty important concept there. The other thing I noticed within your site, in your team documents, and is that all of these are outside of any of these folders. So they're going to be a little harder to get at from Microsoft Teams. So my recommendation is to always put files into one of the folders that are associated with one of your channels. So here is an opportunity to have some discussion about how you want to make SharePoint and Microsoft Teams yours. This is a question for how does NRI want to better leverage Teams and SharePoint. Right now, these are just defaults. So when I was working with Chelsea Severin, who was the one leading the effort to set up these institute sites, these were the only two, like in the org chart, the only two programs. Right now, the org chart has evolved. All of your actual NRI programs are sort of listed under there now, and they're missing here. So I would suggest, I think it would be a great idea to like build out your channels here so that you can have some additional folders and conversation relevant to your individual programs, and then you could have colleagues who aren't within that program still be able to ask colleagues, what are you doing in water quality stuff, or just some of that cross-programmatic conversation. And it's as simple as going in here and saying add channel. So that's not something I have to do for you, but you can certainly do, is just build out your channels to correspond maybe to your programs or to initiatives. And then when you upload files to those conversations, they will also automatically create folders here to correspond to those channels. So in your thinking about how do we want to use our SharePoint site, this would be just a quick, easy recommendation of how you could build that out.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And people are asking like, how has it been used? I've been seeing what we often see in teams is, like internal work that probably wouldn't want to be, even if it was like with a program shared broadly, because it's kind of day-to-day stuff. So probably, again, there's Slack, there's different ways of communicating. I see Teams as being like hey, can we chat? Or like, did everybody see this article that wouldn't necessarily be visible outside of their unit? So I've been seeing that's one reason why we haven't set it up that is like directly connected to this, but definitely something we can talk about that would be sort of something in between, right? Something that has a little bit more functionality that way where you can have those conversations, but also it would be accessible to everybody who's on our NRI site. So again, I've been seeing mostly Teams has been a way to communicate just across, within programs and such that way, not as active in the in what kind of the way you're talking about it, Kevin. So
Yep. So, and those are all just decisions for each group. We're not going to force you to use Microsoft Teams if if that doesn't fit your workflow, right? I'm just talking about like easy low hanging fruit considerations.
Hey, Kevin, can you go back? So Teams and sites, and they're linked, but they're not. Assuming that my brain was already a little logged down, how do I find stuff? So I want to find a report from 2020 that I know exists on somewhere. How do I go about finding those types of documents? Actually, I'm going to preface this question a little bit more. I Googled and I Googled and I Googled and I still can't find it. How do I find it in SharePoint?
Yep. Thank you, Megan. Great question. One of the points we wanted to cover. So search is visible across all of SharePoint, right? So this is one of the big things that differentiates it from our WordPress environment is WordPress, the search really is only for that individual site. So let's say I want to do, I know they prefer reserve, but well, let's go with anything Lake Superior related, right? So you'll see these are all the different documents for the Lake Superior Reserve. And you'll see some information here. First off, it does give you a little preview. So if you're like, I remember it was a PowerPoint, what does it look like? But the information here is organized just within your natural resources documents because you searched from the NRI site, right? So here you're finding anything that is in our Lake Superior related within the NRI extension site.
And how can I tell that, Kevin? Like, how do I know that it's all NRI?
Yep. So here is the site that so this is the document title. This is the site it was found from. This is who edited it. The quick excerpt from the document is all there. So there's files, there's sites, there's news, there's images. But one of the big things that people miss is that we can go back up higher levels within SharePoint. So we can search all of the division of extension intranet. And so if I click that, you'll see the first thing it shows is that the Lake Superior Reserve has their own SharePoint site. Most of you will not see that in your search results. This is because the search results are based on what you have access to, right? So this site is just for the reserve people and their internal documents and stuff. So you won't have access to that site, and the people within the reserve are the only ones that would see these search results that are pulling up from Lake Superior Reserve, but you will all see the things from natural resources. So the search is really powerful. It goes across all of the sites that you have access to, but it also protects the contents so that people who aren't part of your program, who shouldn't be seeing that, are only going to see things relevant to them. They're not going to see your private internal stuff, even though it's all in a shared system.
We should say
Um,
people in the program and random IT people or awesome IT people like Kevin who helped them set everything up. That's why Kevin can see it.
Yeah. So if we come back here, natural resources, one of the other things I want to do a search on is climate change. So of course, in natural resources, you have a lot of climate change content. Again, if we go up to the Division of Extension intranet, you can see the Ag Institute team is doing things on climate change. You know what? I'm going to switch back to my personal login
So
to give a
Kevin,
better example of.
yeah, Kevin, that just reminded me, and Megan, so we talked about members on each of these sites. Does each site have a different way to, like, for example, if somebody wants to be a member of the ag site so they can have access to some of those, is there, you know, do they have to just find the different contact for each of the sites, or what's like ETS, you know, for example, like how do you become a member of each of these sites so that people can have more access or greater access to those as well?
Yeah, great question. So the basic rule is only people who are part of that institute are members of the site. And if that institute, team, group, you know, whatever, wants to cross collaborate, that's where you put those documents and things into the site documents so that all of Extension can find them and you can share those. Now, if you do want to allow, say, Tricia, if you wanted to allow people in the ag, you know, water, you know, group, right? Because there's a lot of crossover between ag water stuff and your natural resources water stuff. If you wanted to cross collaborate, sure, you could add those people in, but they would have access to everything in NRI. And a different approach would be to maybe set up just a separate collaboration space for those people working collaboratively together. So the tiers, like I say, are you've got your internal institute documents, you've got your site documents that are shared with all of Extension, but then we still have the ability to create work group sites that would be shared across any different program combinations or even with other departments on campus.
And so thank you, Kevin. So institute sites, typically those who are part of the institute would be a member. For those such as the ETS group, I know when I had looked at that, or the other groups on, how do you follow, or like what's the best way to have access to the news from those other
Exactly.
Extension SharePoint sites?
Yep. So switching back here, I'm going to go in natural resources. In my personal account, I'm not following this. If I did want to get all the news updates from natural resources, or if you, for instance, were interested in what, you know, human development and relationships is doing, you can go to their institute and you can simply click the following, and now you'll get their news updates. One of the things that I am discussing a little bit with Matthew Call is whether we want to have a institutional news feed that pulls from all the sites. So if you look, this news feed here for the conference updates, this is actually from a separate website, the conference website. But because that's a news feed in our Extension network, I'm actually able to pull that news up to the main Extension news. So for any of the sites that have public news, we can actually pull that news feed into other sites. So if you had, let me show you a cool, so here's where we're going to look at how other groups are using things. I'm going to go to human resources. So here's a really nice site that is not an institute, but it is sharing a lot of different tiles. And this also will speak to how you can have things in your core site and you can have things out in separate sites and they can still support each other. So here you have hiring sites or hiring pages, and you'll see here's the site name, human resources. We go into hiring, and the site is still human resources, and it's just a page about hiring information, right? So all the resources. One of the cool things here is that you can see they've actually dropped their folder of files relevant to just hiring onto their page so that they don't have to maintain links and everything and keep those file links up to date. We can just drop that folder view right onto a web page. And that's something I saw within your NRI site that you might want to leverage, and happy to meet with your development team on that. But on some of these, like volunteer management, you'll notice it links out to a whole separate site, right? So you'll notice this is no longer in the HR site. This is in the volunteer management site. There's a couple different reasons for that. One is the more you put into one site, whenever you want to reorganize, it's more content to, tease out, like which group subsection did this belong to. So in this case, volunteer management is a big enough effort that it wanted its own structure. So you can see it's got its own navigation of subpages. And by just cross-linking everything between the volunteer management site and human resources, it's a seamless experience for the end user, but we get the separate management and control of those documents. But if we go down here to Extension News, most of their news you can see is just in the human resources site. But at one point, let's see if I can find any. No, it's not showing up now. So one of the things that we can do is for these sites that, like, say, volunteer management or the TTC information, TTC was split up because it's a short-term, HR effort, relatively speaking. Its title and total compensation will be done at some point. So, they didn't need to build it into their site. We can just decommission that as a separate site. But they could, like, volunteer management could post news, and I'm able to actually set up this news feed so that it pulls in from multiple separate sites. So if you had a whole bunch of separate NRI related sites, your central NRI site could pull in a news feed from all of those separate sites. So I don't know if Tricia, if that answers that question.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kevin. I mean, so we are just trying to mostly we had been using SharePoint, as you all know, with NRI, primarily as like a document area. So we've been expanding it into more news. We're kind of working our way up to more digests and trying to integrate some of the news, getting those from you all. What we wanted to do today was, again, make sure that people knew how to get to the extension SharePoint site, also how to use that SharePoint broadly. I'm not sure everybody knew there was HR sites and, like all of the other things that Extension had available with SharePoint. Again, NRI is probably, we're building this, but hopefully it's going to be as useful and user friendly as possible. So that's what we're working towards. And then again, I know it was my mistake. I thought that once we had the NRI listserv, that those could automatically populate. We'll make sure that we get those folks. Our list is pretty big right now, but we want to make sure those that you aren't on there, we want to get you as a member. So before you start sending me individual emails, I think we'll have to do a little bit more curation to make sure who isn't and is on that. I think we can do some of the automatic adding before you have to send me an email. So all of a sudden I had a panic of like, oh boy, I don't know who's on or isn't on this member site. My preference would be that if you're automatically on our NRI list, that you should be added. So Kevin, I'll make a quick request for you so that we don't have to do and sort of curate that list ourselves. But that would be something, as if you're on our NRI email list, you should be on this. So we'll make sure we'll do that, and then I'll find a way for you all to make sure that if you are on one list, you're added to this as well. So you're not having to sort of check that. So sorry about that. But yeah, Kevin, thank you so much for giving a chance to see how this is. What we wanted people to do is, again, see the SharePoint site from the extension perspective. How do you get to that? What are the tiles? Where can you find information that you might need? How do you get it sort of a little bit more specialized? I think we all have our own way of what we may want or, to use it. I think that would be helpful. And then who to reach out to when they have questions. So we've already been having some of these questions of like, I can't see this. How do I get access to this? And so maybe this is something, maybe a final wrap up for Kevin, you and Megan about like, how do people get help? How do they, that would be really helpful to know next.
Yeah, I just have a quick thing. So you're right. The first time Kevin was like, Megan, you should learn about SharePoint. I was like, okay. And then I got in here and I was like, oh, there's a lot here. And it's way easier to Google stuff. So it was initially very terrifying. My ask of all of you is either after this meeting, later today when you're just chilling and having some lunch, or after lunch, good life work balance, but whatever, in the next 2 days, take 5 minutes and just poke around. So go to mywis.edu, get into the extension intranet and poke around. There's all kinds of stuff there. Use the search feature. I would encourage you to go to the NRI site because they already have, you folks already, I know it is in the early stages of production, which means a couple of things. One, there's already good stuff there. So find something you didn't know was there. Read a lookout, do something like, and just engage with the site in some way. And then two, while you are poking about, come up with some suggestions, or, oh, this would make more sense if this was here, or I wish it had because you have a really cool opportunity right now to affect change in how that content is curated and presented on your screen. So take advantage of that. And the other cool part is you will look like a power user because the amount of people that regularly go to the intranet site and kind of poke through things is a pretty small amount of people. So next time someone's looking for something, you can be like, oh yeah, I know where that is. It's on the intranet. Or, oh, that's just on the HR SharePoint site. Let me go show you. So there's real opportunity there, and just to be empowered and know where stuff is. And I always say, if you can't find it Googling, check SharePoint or check the internet, because that's probably where it is. So Kevin, did you want to do some wrap up, and then we'll leave you folks?
Yeah, so hopefully I've helped demystify some of SharePoint, right? For most of you, it's just a website. And then search finds things across all of it. There is a great question in the chat that I want to address. Why would we use it for files versus Google? There's two reasons. One, that search that I mentioned, so that you can not just find the files that you have, but for the site documents, anyone in extension would be able to see those files. So the things that you want to share more broadly. The other reason is that Google is implementing, as you may have heard, some quotas, right? So we're going to be limited to 50 gig quotas per person, but also per shared drive. We are way over our quota for the large storage pool in the university, and there's going to be some big cuts coming in terms of the shared drive stuff. So right now, SharePoint is much more generous in terms of that quota. There are going to be quotas coming to SharePoint as well. It's just the way of the world. The free storage, times are over. But the general consensus that I'm hearing from my contacts over at Do It is that we'll have more generous storage in our SharePoint stuff. So that's one thing. The other piece that I want to leave you with, I'm going to share a resource that many of you may find useful. So this is in our kb.wisc.edu/extension. So simply the question, what goes where? We have a document on this. And this is a living document, so we may be updating it periodically, but we have our public websites. So you can see how that is structured. We have our internal websites. And then at the bottom, this is what I want to show, is that we have this chart to help you think about what goes where. And one of the things that you'll notice on the lower half, it's internal documents. For those program materials, sharing and development, we put Teams, SharePoint stuff, and Google Shared Drives together, because one of the big things that we believe is that the tools you use are better than the tools you're forced to use. And that if you're comfortable with Google, use Google, right? I showed you a blended use of SharePoint and Google stuff, and it doesn't have to be a one or the other. Use what you use.
Thanks, Kevin. I know this has been a learning. I've had quite a bit of learning over the last several years on what we can and what would be sort of suitable. So we've been trying to find the right way to communicate and ways that people have access to these various tools. So thank you both, Kevin and Megan, for joining us today. I put that in there. I wanted to make sure to promote the work and the information that you have on this site, because I know it's been really helpful for me. I'm now following you all. So and want to make sure that I'm having the news of the kind of technology. So I see the kind of trainings that you have, from WordPress to Zooms. And so again, super grateful for all the trainings, but if I don't know if you want to say a couple words about that as well.
I would just like to say every month our boss, Greg Jolson's out the ETS newsletter. So that almost always, it's the same kind of digest thing. So that is our boss carefully selecting which articles he thinks are going to be of most interest to folks. And that also does all of our promotions for our just-in-time training, our in-person training, our Zoom, all of our stuff. So that's not created by SharePoint, that is created by humans. So if you ever see that in your inbox, just take 3 seconds to scroll through and see if there's anything that sounds interesting to you. That's yeah.
And Megan, Kevin, can you also put a plug in for your Ask Me Anything standing calendar opportunity for people to jump in and learn more?
Yeah, so Megan just, or looks like Trisha, linked our EdTech calendar. And from that page that Trisha linked, we have a link to our standing morning meetings every morning at 9 a.m. We have what we just call office hours, where you can just drop in and ask questions. I know some of you have. Eric was just on yesterday because he was having some issues getting into something, and we resolved an issue with that. And, I know Martha's stopped in as well. So feel free, if you just have any kind of random, like, how do I do something? Or why isn't this working? Tech question. Those are our open office hours.
All right. Well, Kevin, Megan, thank you so much for joining us today for a little bit of an overview of SharePoint and the internet world that we have. And I love the idea, Megan, of just taking a few minutes and just poking around in there, seeing what it looks like, seeing what's there. As you were going through some things, Kevin, I already saw a few things. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that was there. And now I know where to find it. So that was very helpful. So again, thanks everyone for joining us for the coffee break today. And just to note that I will be canceling our November coffee break because that's during our colleague conference. And you'll see more about our October event coming up as well. I've got an idea in mind for that. So thanks again, and hope you all have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Look at that, right on time. Good group.
We try.
I like it when meetings end on time.
All right. Thanks again, Kevin, Megan. We really appreciate it.
So Trisha?
Yeah,
we can stay on just for a second. Maybe okay. Chad, Megan, and Kevin. I just have a quick question for y'all.
Yeah, the membership